thank you very much, everybody, for joining our session today. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so this session is about partnerships supporting open research and how funders and publishers can help researchers choose open through the research lifecycle. My name is Rebecca Lawrence. I'm Managing Director of F1000. We're an open research publishing company based out of the UK. And I'm co-chairing this session with my colleague, Ashley Farley. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Ashley Farley. I'm a Program Officer of Knowledge and Research Services at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I manage our open access policy, and Gates Open Research is one of my favorite projects to work on. So happy to be here today.
Brilliant. Okay, so what are we trying to cover in this session? So the first thing is really just to sort of explore programs and services that are being developed by funders and publishers that are aimed at really trying to encourage and equip researchers to choose open research approaches. Talk a little bit about some of the benefits of open. Why is this a good thing for us to do? And what are the benefits to researchers, to institutions, the academy, and to wider society? And then we'll go on to a case study. So Ashley will talk through one of the open research publishing platforms, Gates Open Research, and talk through some of the considerations, challenges, opportunities, and learnings. And then I'll follow that up with some work that we've been doing and piloting on the Gates Open Research platform around how we might bring open research concepts through to books publishing through something called Open Plus Books. And then we'll finish up with discussion from each of us talking a bit about some of the future challenges and opportunities for collaboration between particularly publishers and funders, but also others within the community in choosing open research options, and then open it up for questions at the end. So please do add your questions in to Pathable. I believe you should be able to access that through your app. And through the chat function, do add in your questions, and then we'll get to as many of them as we can once we've gone through the presentation. So I thought maybe the best place to start was really thinking about what is open research, or open science as it's often called, although I do prefer the open research term because I think it's more broad in what it encompasses. And as you may well be aware, there's a lot of different definitions for what open research is. I've chosen this one. It's the one that we use. I was part of the EU's Open Science Policy Platform, and this was the definition that we chose, which was around aiming to increase research quality, boost collaboration, speed up the research process, make the assessment of research more transparent, promote public access to scientific results, and introduce more people to academic research. So what does that actually mean in the context of research communication? So I've kind of broken it down into each of those different statements and thought about some of the different elements that really contribute to potentially achieving those different aspects. So thinking about increasing research quality, it's really about improving research integrity, and through that, to do that, in some ways, part of it is around improving reproducibility and replicability, and then thinking about the validation process that research goes through. Looking at boosting collaboration, it's really in the context of scholarly communication, thinking about how we support better use and reuse of research output, so we really maximise the opportunity they provide through collaboration. Speeding up the research process is fairly straightforward, obviously making sure we have much more rapid access to new findings of all types, and that's so crucial across all disciplines, but particularly in some of the major challenges that we're all facing at the moment, we're all working through at the moment, around climate change, around COVID, and those other aspects where it's so essential that we speed up the process. Making research assessment of research more transparent. So that's a number of different aspects to it. I think one of them is around making sure there's fairness in how research is being assessed. Make sure there's accountability, and that often that then goes hand in hand with transparency, so you can actually really see that assessment and making sure that people doing it are accountable, and ultimately making sure there is trust in that assessment process, and indeed trust in the research ultimately that's being published. There's promoting public access to scientific results. So it's not only about visibility and accessibility of that research, but also about equitability. Both are being able to access the results, but also, of course, of the researchers in being able to communicate those results in a way that everybody can access. So it's equitability on all sides. And then introducing more people to academic research. So again, this comes back to, really helping to support trust in academic research as society, and this is so crucial, as well as access and indeed public engagement. Some of the challenges and needs of some of the different communities have sort of grouped it around some of the different elements. So thinking about authors and researchers as authors, obviously what's really crucial, as I've touched on already, is about being able to get rapid credit for the work that the researcher has done, and indeed credit for all of their outputs, and not just focusing on sort of traditional narrative research article, but as I will talk to in a minute, researchers produce a whole raft of different outputs across the research lifetime and life cycle, and it's important that they can get credit for all of those different outputs. Also to democratize the sharing of research, and again, I touched on that just now, in terms of making sure that all researchers are able to share their research. When they've discovered something, they should be able to get that research out there without having unnecessary barriers to stop them to do that. Obviously wanting a fair treatment in the validation process, and I said having that transparency goes with it. Having the ability to update publications as work evolves. So, research isn't sort of this static thing where it's sort of done. It, of course, evolves, and often, publication happens as that at distinct points in that process. But, having the ability to actually make it much more living, just like the research, I think is really important. And then really simplifying the sort of admin side of actually the process of getting the work published and the process of paying and all of those other things which take unnecessary time away from authors. Second is looking at sort of readers and users, both as researchers, but also thinking about some of the broader community and broader society that would benefit. And part of this is tackling, put at the top of the sort of snippet around the reproducibility crisis, about tackling some of the issues around making sure that the underlying research data and code and methods and all the different elements of a piece of research, videos, could be all sorts of things, that are made accessible to support reuse and reanalysis, and hence independent validation of those findings. Goes to the point I made earlier about integrity as well, and being able to really assess what's sitting behind those sort of summary results. Goes hand in hand with that is making sure we've got a balanced view on research, so not just the positive and sort of high impact findings, as it were, but also seeing the negative and null findings, so we get a balanced view, which actually helps to support better reproducibility. Rapid access, of course, the latest discoveries, again, is crucial for readers and users. Visibility of the level of article validation, I think it's really important, so you can see actually what level it's gone through and who's validated it and how, what they thought, and access to those expert perspectives that you often don't get to see. And then thinking about funders and institutions and governments, really about trying to reduce research waste and maximize return on investment. And again, I've got a snippet up there in terms of the quote that's quite famous, I think, now, in terms of, is 85% of health research really wasted? And their estimate that genuinely is what's thrown away. And whether we agree with the exact percentage, it's certainly high. There's certainly a lot of good quality research that's done that's just not communicated, which is a waste of time because we don't get to see the benefit of it. So how we sort of reduce that research waste and make sure that we've also got much more rapid and much broader impact of that funding, so that we can move to resolving the questions that society and problems that society has much more quickly. Increasing research quality and integrity and reproducibility comes back again, of course. And then minimizing admin, as we talked about, and boosting collaboration and team science are obviously crucial, particularly in tackling some of the big problems that we have today that we're trying to address. And then, of course, an interest and desire to maximise adherence to their policies. So just finish off by also just touching on one of the points that I just talked about, and just touching on it a little bit more in terms of thinking about the outputs across the research lifecycle from grant funding. And this just sort of shows at a sort of a high level the general process across the research lifecycle, around starting from the concept, of course, going to the plan, exploring, collecting, analysing, engaging. And as I say, often most publications are focused very much right at the end. You see on the left-hand side the research article, and that tends to be where much of the focus is. Sometimes some opinion articles and reviews, but that really is where the focus is. And you have to wait for the research to go around the whole cycle to get there, right? And actually, there's a lot of outputs that are produced as you go around, study protocols and methods and data notes and brief reports of initial findings and all sorts of things that are really important to get out there, both to speed up the process of research, but also for the researcher to get feedback as they're going through the process on the research that they're doing. And then the piece in the middle is there's a lot of other types of outputs, particularly documents that often are really important outputs of research that typically don't get shared, or certainly not in a very visible way. They may be hidden on a website somewhere. Maybe they don't need peer review, but they're often quite important. They could be impact reports, they could be consensus reports, they could be all sorts of different things, technical reports, training materials, conference proceedings, really valuable outputs that are important to share, and to share more widely and to share quickly. And so these are some of the issues that the collaboration, which Ashley is going to talk about now, really tried to address through the Gates Open Research Platform. So I'll now hand over to Ashley to just talk through some of those aspects.
Thank you. Let's see. Getting there. All right. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag. Okay, now, do you see everything all looking great? Perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so first I wanted to talk a little bit about our more focused open access journey, which I think is our first step to starting to think about open research more broadly. We launched our first policy in 2015, and it's been an all grant agreement since then. So it is a requirement of getting foundation funding is that your research outputs will be openly available. We launched Gates Open Research in 2016 to provide a revolutionary publishing option for Gates grantees that I think really captures the future of publishing. Just wanted to highlight how much we have spent on open access fees. It's actually closer now to about 25 million, which has given us about a little over 10,000 articles that are open access. And wanting to be good stewards of our funding, we're definitely thinking, more about the cost of open access publishing, or publishing in general, and how we can do better. And then as far as from a policy perspective, policy is really meant to drive behavior change, and for the publishers that our grantees often publish in, we've seen kind of some promising movement, but just calling out that I think we can continue to push harder from a policy perspective. So why is open research important to us? So Rebecca's covered a lot for the research community. So this is coming from a bit of a funder perspective. I think it definitely aligns well with our mission of increasing access and reusability. There's research showing that open access articles are read and cited more, that it can improve research integrity. We've been focusing a lot more on equity from a foundation perspective. So we want to make sure that everyone can access the information resulting from our funding without financial barriers or having to wait for embargoes, and trying to create an equitable system of access to information. And then I think we're taking an opportunity to really work on forging partnerships that align better with our values. Lots of room for improvement there, but I think we're having critical conversations on what this means for the foundation. And then the increase of transparency, again, is quite important, as we want to better understand the impact of our funding, where it extends to, how it can be built upon. And then we're seeing that more transparency can solve issues of research fraud and lack of reproducible science. And then it helps the research community know, what we're doing and what we're funding and where our problem areas that we're trying to solve globally. But why Gates Open Research specifically? And this is definitely, I think, more focused on a publishing point of view. But for me, these are what I find really intriguing about the fully open post-publication peer-reviewed model. So there's no journal shopping or cascading. So, we don't waste time kind of going through the review process behind closed doors and then have it be rejected and need to start all over again somewhere else, or trying to, hit a higher impact journal and then have it cascaded. We know where it's going to be published, and the journal's scope or novelty. So that's, not a barrier to publication. It really puts the power of publishing research in the author's hands. So if it's something that they feel is important, then it can be published there. Same with journal scope. Like, this is available for all of the research disciplines that we fund. So there's no time kind of wasted around whether this is a good fit. And there isn't a brand that we need to kind of uphold with novelty. There's no reliance on, terrible metrics like the impact factor. This solves kind of the disconnect between preprints and the final version. So what is hosted on the platform acts very much like a preprint, but it cannot be submitted elsewhere. And so that creates the linkage throughout the versions. It solves the lack of versioning problem. So one of the things that I think is really dynamic about the platform is how we're able to see the whole kind of research review and discussion unfold on the platform, which is something that we typically don't get to see. And I think that adds important transparency to the reader of, okay, where's the article when it was first submitted and started? What are the peer review reports? How did that improve? How did the authors react to that? How many versions are put out? We've seen authors that have put out new versions that wasn't necessarily needed to get past kind of the peer review or get indexed, but they really want to partake in the conversation and have kind of that version of record accurate as much as possible or improved upon as much as possible. And even from the standpoint of kind of thinking about a version of record or a final, finished piece, that's not really how research works. So this gives the opportunity for updates to be done later. So instead of maybe publishing a whole new article that builds upon previous work, there can be a new version produced, which I think is really exciting. Yeah, and it's a very open and transparent process. And then, let's see, lack of data sharing is typically what we've seen a lot of journals, but here there's a real and intentional focus on ensuring that the data underlying the article is shared. Again, so why Gates Open Research? I think it's a model that better reflects the current state of technology. I think typically in publishing, we are still very much stuck in the print era. So this will help us get out of that. It's an affordable publishing option for grantees. I mean, we do cover all the publishing costs for Gates authors, but in our work around price and cost transparency and understanding how much does it cost for open access, this is definitely one of the most affordable options that we currently have. And then I wanted to highlight again the strong support for authors around quality data sharing. So we've done some investigations of how our grantee authors share data, and we noticed a surprising trend that it really depended on where they published. So if where they published provided a lot of supports, had requirements around data sharing, helped them build robust data availability statements, then the quality of the research was improved and the compliance was higher, rather than publishers that don't offer any kind of supports or put a strong focus on data sharing. And why F1000? So I definitely view them as a leader in innovation for around open access publishing model. We had a clear alignment. Rebecca and I have worked together for a long time. So I've gotten to see their values, and I think we're equally mission driven. And we followed in the footsteps of Welcome Open Research and Welcome Trust, who we work closely with on open access work and projects. And so we were able to see it kind of live beforehand and said, yes, that's something we definitely want to be a part of. And then next I want to share kind of what is on the platform now and what that looks like. So this data is accurate as of October 13th. When we talk about different outputs, we're really trying to get our grantee authors to publish other artifacts, not just the traditional research article. Of course, it's hard to have behavior change and everyone has the habit of thinking of like, okay, I'm now at this point in the publishing or research process. I'm going to put together a research article, but we've seen growth in other areas. And I think one of the most interesting one has been the open letter. It's been really critical during the pandemic as a way to be able to communicate opinions and things and studies much more quickly. And when we first launched the platform and we're socializing it with grantee authors, one of the things I heard a lot of is that, great, yeah, peer-reviewed research, of course, yes, but not all of our grantees and the work that we fund and our partnerships are in academia. So there was a real push for having different options for documents, posters, and slides. And that's been really successful. And we heard, that our grantees want to be able to share all kinds of artifacts in easy ways that they can share with their community. This is kind of overview of where our authors are. We definitely really are trying to have a full global representation, a lot of opportunity to do that. But yeah, so these are just some of the top institutions that publish on the platform. And then, and I'm not sure if the slides will be shared later, but you can come back to this information, but kind of showing that the time aspect of having the kind of pre-printed version up to going through the peer review process and having the information then indexed, which is a lot quicker than traditional publishing. And then covering kind of visibility and impact, because this is really important to our grantees that are using the platform, is having that kind of readership and getting their work disseminated to a wider audience. So, articles have had over, 230,000 views. We're definitely getting citations. If you're interested in alt metrics, that is being tracked as well. And then again, highlighting the importance of the other kind of non-peer reviewed types of artifacts that have a lot of views as well. Okay, Rebecca, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So let me just share my screen here. So I'm just going to finish off by talking a little bit about open research publishing for books and thinking, we talked about the fact that there are a whole raft of different types of outputs, right, that come from around the research cycle. And our aim really is to get beyond thinking particularly about formats and thinking, journal articles have to be here and books have to be there and conference posters have to be there, and thinking more holistically really about the outputs of research. And so we're thinking, how can we think about books in a different way and use some of the tools and technologies that we have to really rethink some of this. So I came up with this concept called Open Plus Books, which has been sort of created both as a sort of collaboration between F1000, but also leveraging the expertise of the fact that we now sit as of the beginning of last year within Taylor and Francis, who obviously a world-renowned books publisher and have huge expertise there. And really about sort of trying to fuse together the traditional print and open access books model with the open research publishing model that we talked about, and enabling those books, indeed the chapters, to sit on a much more dynamic and updatable platform, but while still retaining, there's still clear benefit from being able to have the book in print and in sort of a more traditional ebook format. So kind of getting the best of both worlds. I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but just to give you a sort of sense of sort of the publishing process, the idea really is that there's sort of still the traditional approach to commissioning books through the normal system, and indeed the sort of chapters that sit through that, and going through the normal review process that normally happens on an outline before the book or the chapters are then written. when they come in, that they go through the books editor as normal, but then they're submitted onto the F1000 Research platform. And what that enables is both the set of comprehensive pre-publication checks that we do as standard on F1000 to make sure all the policies and ethical guidelines are adhered to, but it also means publication can be really, really fast. So it can be the same sort of speed as an article. And it enables that, that chapter. You don't even have to wait for the whole book. You can just do it chapter by chapter to be published as and when they're ready, and to ensure again that the underlying data, if there is any, and code and all the other different elements that might be part of it are made accessible, and in some cases have visualization tools, etc. There's then an optional part. Of course, we have the open peer review mechanism and in there. So although you typically don't peer review the book chapters once they come in, there is an option. Indeed, we have authors who are keen to actually go through an open peer review process for their book chapter. So there's an option to go through that and to revise the chapters again, just like with an article. And indeed to then use that versioning we talked about to be able to update chapters. So move sort of book chapters to becoming living in much the same way as we just talked about with articles. But also still leaves the option that when the authors are ready and want to collate the chapters together and have a printed book and a more standard ebook, they can do that whenever they want. And indeed then, as chapters may be updated over time later, they can do a second edition as a print version or an open access book, again, when they choose and when they would like. So it puts the authors at the center of the process and able to make their own decisions on some of this. So key things that this aims to achieve, really, one is around that rapid publication and the fact that when a chapter is ready, you're able to get it out there straight away. You don't have to wait till the whole book is complete, and particularly for multi-author books, it's really valuable. The books can become dynamic and evolving. It means you can add chapters, you can add other elements to it as well. There are different types of books that can be really valuable for. They can also be updatable, so you can update different chapters at different times. So, different areas may be faster or slower moving, so it enables those chapters to stay up to date. Really important for things like standards and codes and policies and things that might change quite quickly in some spaces. It means that people are working off the latest information. Supports the ability to have that underlying data there and have that interactivity and visualization so that people can reanalyze the data and the code on the fly within the article. And it also supports credit for all the different types of contributions to the research for the author, rather than simply just at the level of the book. And then it's flexible, so it allows authors to decide when they want to make updates, if they want to make updates, when they want to print the book, if they want to print the book. And as I say, the option of open peer review is there as well, which again, isn't a traditional option for books, but is actually something that's quite nice to be able to get that feedback and to be able to get community comment on the books as well. So we've done a pilot Open Plus book on the Gates Open Research platform. And this is just a couple of screenshots of it. It's around child development with the D score. And we've got a couple of chapters in there at the moment. The authors are planning to do another couple of chapters, but it's enabled them to get those two out first. They decided actually that they wanted some peer review on it. So the chapters are going through open peer review at the moment, but you can see on the left hand side for the preface, actually, of course, there's no point in peer reviewing the preface, so you have the option to have it not peer reviewed and it's just clearly labeled so that the reader knows what's going on and whether we're waiting peer review or whether actually the authors decided not to peer review that output. So that's just a quick snapshot of some of the work we've been doing around the pilot. We're very keen to, it's sort of early stages and evolving. We're very keen to work with the community to figure out actually what makes the best sense around books and thinking about them in a different way and the sorts of things that now you have the ability to get things out quickly as and when they're ready and be able to update them, to be able to peer review them at different stages and things, to try and understand what are the different things that authors, indeed readers, want to be able to do. So I'll just wrap up with a couple of challenges and opportunities that we've sort of seen from the collaborations that we've had, both with the Gates Foundation, but indeed with a whole raft of other funders that we've been working with. And I'll also pass them to Ashley for her sort of thoughts about some of the challenges and opportunities before we open for questions. So do type your questions in the meantime. So just some of the sort of lessons learned and challenges and opportunities that I think we've sort of seen from working much more closely with funders over the last few years. I've highlighted some of these, and indeed with other parties as well. I think there's a real need for more progress towards adjustments of the incentive system to really support and enable and give researchers the confidence indeed to publish in a slightly different system that works in a different way. And that's obviously not a simple thing to do, but and there is progress around the world to really start that shift, but it's really important, and that whole cultural shift is, I think, critical to enable adoption of newer approaches. And it's also really crucial to have collaboration with other key stakeholders, particularly research institutions, but also scholarly societies and academies and others, to make sure there's alignment around policies and incentives, because otherwise researchers kind of get caught in the middle, being asked to do different things by different key parties. There's obviously disciplinary and regional variations that are needed that can add complexity to some of these aspects and need to be taken into consideration. And then I think really funders and research institutions particularly play a crucial role in supporting a transition to more open research practices, ultimately for the benefit of society. But I think they probably play some of the strongest roles in enabling that shift. And so I think we need probably more open and active support and collaboration, both between each other, but also together with publishers, so that we can work together to provide tools and infrastructures that enable researchers to work in an open research way and communicate in such a way, but also to encourage and reassure them and provide them with the necessary rewards and incentives to do so. I don't know, Ashley, if you had some thoughts in terms of the sort of challenges and opportunities that you've seen from your side.
Yeah, so yeah, I think behavior change in general is it's hard. It's not very fast moving, but I do think you're right, where funders have a major role to play here, and we've been trying to encourage more funders, and I think we're gaining momentum of changing the kind of perception that funders really only have a role in kind of funding the research and that's it, but talking more about the importance of also funding infrastructure and dissemination of the information, that it doesn't mean that funds are diverted from the research itself, but that's a critical component of research, is the dissemination aspect of it. And I think, yeah, but we've seen a lot of repeat authors, which has been great on the platform as well, or reuse and gaining interest. And so once there's kind of that, I mean, I wouldn't call it a risk, but I can see how others can call it a risk in trying something new with your, publication or output. And so we've had a good feedback and experience. And I think that's what's important. Everyone just kind of has to jump in and try it once, and then it kind of clicks into place. And that often becomes a preferred method for dissemination of research. Do we have any questions? I don't think I've seen any yet.
I don't think I've seen any. I've just put a note in the chat. I'm hoping we're all looking at the same chat.
Yeah, I see it. That works.
Yes. So please do go, for those of you in the room, but also those of you online, if you go into the Possible platform, there is a chat box. So do add your questions into there. And yes, glad you're asking, I think, out in the room as well. So thank you for that. Maybe while we're waiting for people to think of the questions or type them in, I guess I wondered, Ashley, in terms of how you think, particularly in the US, we can sort of accelerate progress towards open research principles, and because I know there has been some good movement there, but how do we really get things going, do you think?
I think we need more policies that call out and align with open research principles. I know policies overall are not fun to have or manage, and that often, it can be hard to track compliance, and we don't want to always, tackle the issue with sticks, but also have carrots. But I think that's one of the main mechanisms to really push for change. We've been waiting. I think a lot of waiting for like NIH to put out more progressive policies around openness, and that would help kind of open the floodgates, so to speak, of other funders following the lead, and then that applies pressure to kind of the research publishing and dissemination ecosystems to follow suit. So while policy is never the most fun, I think it's really critical, because we definitely have so many examples of principles and guidelines and things to help. But it's I think policy is really what's pushing that change. And that reminded me of something I wanted to mention earlier, is kind of shifting. I think we need to shift the narrative from openness only being about giving, that I'm always giving away my research, I'm giving away this, but more of how it facilitates collaboration, how you can also then, if that becomes the norm and there's more information and research available, you can incorporate that into your own research. And I'm trying to shift away from that kind of narrative of it's only about giving, because we do hear a lot of concerns about that from researchers, and a lot of like, why should I spend the extra time doing this, and doing it in, I think, a timely manner too, because we've been really focusing on the foundation around timely access to data assets especially. And that's hard to do when researchers are like, well, I still want to spend time with this data and publish on it, or write more, or think more and do more. Trying to encourage that the openness, that point, is also a benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You're right. And we spend a lot of time, particularly around trying to encourage researchers to share their data, in focusing on why is this good for you as a researcher to share your data, and why is it actually a benefit to you and of course to society. But actually there are some really crucial benefits. We have some questions.
Great. I would love to. So we launched Gates Open Research in 2016. So it's been active since then. Fully. I love the discussion around fully open peer review, and I know it's a hot topic. I think it definitely can help ensure quality in the process. Would questionable works be removed? No, and I think that's part of the transparency, is that let's say if it doesn't pass the peer review, or there are a lot of comments, which do need to be critical and constructive, I think, and Rebecca can speak more to this. If it's not that, then part of the report may be removed, but I don't think we've had many issues on that. But if we remove questionable works, there's a possibility that it could be published elsewhere, and you lose that kind of transparency in the research process. So we want to keep it there, and then the reader can see exactly what issues the peer reviewers brought up and whether or not they were addressed. I mean, we have had some works that have not passed the peer review process and haven't had another version available, but at least you can see it all there. And I know that there are perceived risks with open peer review, but I'm a major advocate for it, because I do think that we should be able to have constructive conversations in the open about the research itself. And I think kind of hiding behind or having it closed off can help bullies kind of hide behind that, and having to have like an editor manage those conversations. I don't think is the best way to do that anymore, especially since often I hear from researchers that, especially in smaller disciplines, they can figure out who probably peer reviewed it anyways. And I think just having it out, transparent, and I think named is important as well. That gives credit to those doing the peer review reports, which is important. You can have multiple people listed on a peer review report, because we often know that it's not probably just one person pulling that together. So I think that's what I would say about open peer review. Rebecca, do you have anything to add?
Yes, all I was going to say. I mean, I agree. I think the transparency is crucial, because it makes sure that the reviewers are accountable for what they say, right? So it means that they're not overly overly critical, but equally not under critical, because everybody can see what they say and what they, they need to be able to stand by what they say. So, it does bring that transparency. In terms of the question, in terms of would questionable works be removed? So it's worth bearing in mind that there is a really detailed set of objective checks, and the key is that they're objective around the article beforehand to try and get rid of, we'll automatically check for plagiarism and for policy issues and ethical requirements and a whole lot of things, checking around the data, make sure the right data and it's shared in the right way and all those kind of things. That helps to remove a lot of those more questionable works. Beyond that, when it's published, reviewers can say, I have a concern about this. Equally, there may be reviewers that think this article's fine, and you do often get to see reviewers with quite different views. If there is a fundamental problem, I used the wrong data set, I've just realized an author, or, something like that. Obviously, it's we're members of COPE, so Committee on Publication Ethics. We follow exactly the same rules as every journal in terms of retractions and replacements and all of those things. So we go through that same process. We have a question where we're slightly over time, but I'll just cover off these last couple of questions. You mentioned open letters gaining popularity as a publication type.
Yeah.
Can you tell more about that? Do you want to just talk to that, Ashley?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so that's kind of a correspondence article type, and I think it was really important to both program staff, and actually it was our foundation staff that used it the most during the pandemic, and I think is a way to be able to correspond with a larger audience and the community about the pandemic. Then often those article types can be hard to get approved in other journals. So some of them, they started at the platform right away and getting it. Some of them had gone through the process with a couple other well-known journals, but they weren't a good fit, or they were just rejected. And then they're like, well, we need to communicate this information. And so they were published on the platform.
Great. We have a question. How do you see open science growing at medium and small institutions and in a broader set of fields outside of the traditional sciences that we think of? I mean, from our perspective, and I guess looking, globally, we see, if we start thinking about sort of some of the humanities and social sciences, particularly where the publication costs are covered. So, for example, we work with the European Commission. We see actually a high proportion of content from humanities and social sciences fields and from some of those other communities where, actually I think there's almost an unexpected level of enthusiasm to be able to adopt open research practices. Obviously, there are some challenges in certain areas, and part of it is around actually sort of the funding aspects around that. But that's certainly our sort of perspective. I don't know, Ashley, if you want to add anything.
I do not have a lot to add on that point.
Okay, that's fine. And then for me, from Robert Harrington, for me, another key aspect of open research is accessibility. What are you doing in this area? I guess the question is,
I know one for us is we've gotten a lot of feedback about different languages and translations. So that's one area that we've been discussing, and kind of how can we leverage the platform for that. I think also supporting more editorial services and writing of manuscripts upfront. So there's trainings available, but actually being able to connect someone with help in even writing a manuscript, especially if English is not a first language, or if they're new to academic publishing in general. And then expanding of file types that are supported, I think, is one I've heard a lot as well. So having more audio and visual medium has been brought up as being important to our grantees on the platform.
Great. Thank you very much, Ashley. I'm aware we've gone a few minutes over. So we should probably close the session, but I'd like to say thank you very much to Ashley for joining me in running the session. I hope everybody found it very useful. I'd like to say thank you to all of you attendees, both online and in person. Thank you for all the questions, and thank you for listening. Hope you have a lovely day.
Take care.
Cheers and bye-bye.
Bye.